Why did I just do that?
Do what?
That was Nico's dad. He wants to meet you. He's invited us for lunch.
That's all right. We can go do that.
I can't. He's with a man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to see him in his blissful domestic gay. I can't be part of that. I can't go to that apartment. I don't want to see him happy. I can't. Oh, I love you. Oh, that's right.
Hi, Glenda.
Good morning. How are you?
Can you see me? No, you can't see me, can you?
Can't see you.
Okay, hold on.
That's okay.
Okay, now.
There you are.
Here I am.
See you now.
How are you today?
I'm good. I love your artwork behind you. It's so cool.
Oh, thanks.
It's awesome.
So what's your weekend like?
This weekend, just catching up on some chores, and
Oh,
I need to get out and do some scouting for the CBC next Saturday to see what I see in the areas. This will be my first one, so I really want to contribute even a little tiny bit.
oh, I'm sure you'll contribute a lot.
Well, at least I'll have my camera, so if we need to take photos of something, that we have to document, at least I know I could do that part. So
yeah,
we'll see. And if you want to come over Sunday, just let me know.
Okay.
To work. If you want to wait till next week, that's also fine.
Well, I'm working during the week. Like, I'm putting in a lot of hours to make up for me being out.
Okay.
So Sunday morning would be perfect if that's, but I can come over anytime. I can come at 6 a.m. I can come at 6 p.m. I'm completely flexible.
Maybe like 9 or 10 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
You can see how it's going and let me know. I'm not going to be going anywhere, so.
Okay, sounds good.
Anybody else joining in yet?
No, not yet. Everybody's waiting, I guess.
Yeah, that's all right.
I hope I don't mess up this time.
You won't. You won't.
I have to share. Oh, and pause recording. Okay, I want to see if we're recording yet. I guess we are.
It says recording on my screen.
Okay.
At the top left, it says recording.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
We might, Nancy Neal might join in. Remember, I told you she's new. And she first joined Audubon, and then she expressed an interest in this, and she's really excited. So I told her she should just join in on the last 3 meetings. So
oh, yeah. Here comes Lena. Yeah. Hi, Lena. Whoop. Hi, Glenda. Hi, Lena. Oops. Sorry, that's my alarm.
It's okay. Do you remember when Drew did herps for us in our training year?
Yeah.
He showed that video about people running over snakes.
Yes. Yes.
That's the thing I'll always remember about that lecture. That video, I believe it. People are heartless.
I remember that. And I remember he had that great diagram of the nomenclature.
Yeah, he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
He's a good teacher.
Mm-hmm. Where is he now?
He's working a couple of different jobs to make ends meet. His wife is finishing graduate school, so.
Okay. Nobody's coming on yet, so there's just 3 of us here.
Still 5 minutes.
Yeah.
There's Lena.
Woo! Hi, Lena.
Hey, slow to get set up this morning.
No, you're not. It's just the 3 of us. We could have a committee meeting.
Okay, let's make it count.
How are you?
Good. How are
Good.
you?
I'm fine.
How's your foot?
It's fine. I'm on my walking cast,
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice.
This is all being recorded. Sorry, people.
Oh, you can hit the pause button if you want.
I think I will.
Okay.
to disseminate to you, as well as a number of animals that you're going to get a chance to see. We've even brought down one of our rattlesnakes and a copperhead that you'll get a chance to look at, and we'll tube them for you, which is the way that we generally work with them when we have to do stuff that's, say, for research or take blood or whatever, even for demonstration purposes. It's a lot safer. So, let's make sure I can. All right. So, as you can see here, herpetology is really Greek for crawling things. It clearly includes organisms that are not necessarily each other's closest relatives, but that's the way that biology has sort of categorized them. We know that fish are ancestral to amphibians, and we also know that a certain group of amphibians gave rise to reptiles, with mammals then coming from some sort of reptile-like ancestor. So there's some characteristics that are shared by all of these animals. All of them have 4 legs, although a number of groups have lost their limbs. Why don't you come over, Mark, and that way they can see you.
Okay.
This is Mark Lee.
Hi, how's it going?
All current living forms are ectotherms, which means they use the environment or they use behavior to maintain their temperature control. And as adults, by far the most common characteristic is they all breathe with lungs. If any time during any of this you have a question, you please just stop me. So amphibians have smooth skin, but in the second layer of the skin, which is called the dermis, they actually do have mucus, and typically they have poison glands. And there are a lot of things that we're going to show you today that do have poison glands in their skin. It's interesting because there's a certain type of behavior and coloration called aposematic. And that basically is an advertisement that if you eat me, you're going to die. Okay. And that's because so many of these things do have poison glands in their skin, such as obviously the various types of frogs in Central America that are used by the indigenous peoples to put the skin on top of the arrow, and they'll bring howler monkeys down from 120 feet up in the air. So some other characteristics: eggs must be laid in moist surroundings. And you know, typically I think most people think of amphibians and they think of going to a pond and hearing frogs call and everything else. And if those are the type of amphibians you're dealing with, well, those most of the time will be laying their eggs in those bodies of water. But you want to realize there's an awful lot of other variety in amphibians, and they really try, and I use that word try that way, they really try to get their eggs and their babies out of the water. Interestingly enough, there are some from Asia that actually will rub their legs together and make a foam, and that foam they will then build a nest, and they hang that nest over a pond. And so the babies, the eggs, develop in those moist surroundings, and then when it's time to hatch, they drip on down like spittle into the water. There are also amphibians that will lay a single egg in the cup of an epiphyte in Amazonia. And so, yes, the truth is they must keep their eggs moist, but they do lots and lots of ways of handling that.
Some of them will even lay their eggs in soil.
Yeah, some will lay their eggs in soil. Some of them will build a nest in what is a stream bed that is dry, waiting, counting on the fact that historically that stream has flooded. If it doesn't flood that year, obviously they lose that whole clutch. So the other things, eggs hatch as larvae and then metamorphose into adults. Typically as larvae, they breathe with gills, adults with lungs, and interestingly, through the skin. There's not a whole lot of organisms that are vertebrates that use cutaneous respiration, is what we call that. And that cutaneous respiration that we see in amphibians really allows them to live in some environments that you would never believe an amphibian or any other animal could live in. And I'll give you an example. When I was a graduate student down in Houston, we had a call for asking us if we wanted some sirens. And sirens are a type of salamander or related to salamanders. These things were living about 7 feet underground, and a sewer pipe had broken, and they were essentially living in the muck around the sewer pipe, but they can breathe through their skin, so therefore they were quite happy. And they also, by the way, have gills and lungs, which is interesting for an amphibian. But as I said, they're cold-blooded. It doesn't mean they don't get to extremes. One of the most remarkable things I ever saw in my life was being out at Yosemite in May, and there were frogs that were calling as they were sitting on the snow beside a brook. They have a 3-chambered heart. We have a 4-chambered heart, 2 auricles, 2 ventricles. They have 2 auricles and 1 ventricle. Reptiles. So obviously, if you look at what happens from a fish to an amphibian, that's a major, major change. And obviously you're changing the girdles, the pectoral girdle, the pelvic girdle at the waist. You're actually increasing the ability of the head to move because you're coming onto land. And at the time, there were some pretty nasty invertebrates, these sea scorpions that were 2 meters long that would love to eat an amphibian or a pseudo amphibian trying to come out of the water. And so there's a lot of changes that went from being a fish to an amphibian. And one of the most important one is the lightening of the skull. The number of bones and the density of the bones really went down. So once we start looking at reptiles, now we have direct development, and that ultimately leads to what we call the amniotic egg. And that's the kind of egg that, of course, we have that has the various membranes that allow for movement of materials in and out. But obviously, in reptiles, they will typically have a leathery covering over the surface of the egg. And that, of course, prevents desiccation. And allows the embryo to develop. They also typically will have a lot of yolk in the egg. Probably the most relevant characteristic that we see all the time is their epidermal scales. And the epidermal scale is the outer, epidermis is the outer layer of the skin, and those scales have evolved in this group to prevent desiccation, which is critical. They also have an advanced secondary palate in the roof of the mouth. So if you'll take your tongue and you'll rub it on the top of your, in your mouth, and on the surface, and it's a little bit rough up there, that's your secondary palate, okay? And above that is the primary palate. Now, virtually all organisms will have a primary palate, but a few reptiles, including crocodilians, alligators and crocodiles and the gharials, as well as a few lizards, do have the secondary palate. And that is such an advancement because it allows you to actually breathe while you're eating. Now, it becomes most important in mammals, and the reason is because mammals chew their food. Very few other vertebrates chew their food, but mammals do, and because of that, they had to really carefully evolve the secondary palate. We're not exactly sure why crocodilians may have it, although I would guess, and do you know for sure, did dinosaurs have a secondary palate? So probably most dinosaurs would have had a secondary palate as well. While it may not seem like an incredible advancement, the development of a penis for internal fertilization is absolutely an essential character for these organisms. The other thing is legs with 5 toes and fingers. And then they have advanced kidneys, lungs, and hearts. Crocodilians actually have a 4-chambered heart, but they have a small opening that connects 2 of the aortic arches out of the ventricles. And so it's really, we call it a 3.5 to 4-chambered, but their kidneys are almost as advanced as ours. Their lungs are similar to ours, other than the fact that they don't have true alveoli, which are the small areas where we actually get gas exchange in the lungs. Okay, this is one of my favorite topics because it's so important that people understand that being cold-blooded doesn't necessarily mean that you're very primitive. We use an incredible amount of the energy that we take in food in order to maintain warm-bloodedness. And certainly being warm-blooded does allow you to live in some areas where other organisms can't. But the fact is, if you look at where some of these animals live, most of them prefer to live at about the same temperature range, 37 to 42 degrees centigrade, that we do. We're 37. The important part here, though, is how relatively little of the energy that they take in, that they use to maintain their body temperature, because they're just moving from areas of where it's shady to areas where it's sunny, or from the land into the water. Water will tend to oftentimes be more stable in terms of temperature. The reason that mammals and birds can't literally get as small as we see some amphibians and reptiles is, quite honestly, they can't eat enough. They can't eat enough. If you look at the smallest organism that we know of that's warm-blooded, it's a shrew. And that shrew has to eat between every 20 and 30 minutes every day of its life, or it can't survive. It cannot maintain its body temperature. The hummingbirds, the Cuban bee hummingbird, is one of the very smallest warm-blooded as well. And what hummingbirds do, and you may know this, but hummingbirds literally go into torpor at night. They shut down. And some of them actually spend 2 to 3 hours not breathing. They will actually stop breathing. And I've checked with Nancy McIntyre, who is our ornithologist, or one of them here, and she said, yeah, they actually do stop. So here, for those animals I just spoke of, the shrew and the hummers, they use up to 98% of the energy. In ectotherms, they only use 2% of the energy. So what they have then is the ability to use, first of all, they don't need as much energy as we do because they're not trying to maintain temperature, but that energy that they do take in as food, they can use toward reproduction, which is really critical. Any questions so far? Okay. This is Paedophryne amuensis, and it's the smallest frog, and that's sitting on a dime. Okay, that is an adult frog sitting on a dime. And a friend of mine, Chris Austin, who's at LSU, discovered this in New Guinea in 2012. Another close friend of mine, named Fred Krause, discovered some that are within half a millimeter of being as small as these. And he was also working in New Guinea. This is on the tip of one of those wooden matches that you use to light your fireplace. This is the world's smallest lizard. It's a juvenile, and it's on that's a match head. And these are found in Madagascar. Madagascar has an amazing numbers of different types of lizards, especially chameleons. It's probably by far the most diverse group. And so many of these animals are so small that they're virtually impossible to see. And so it's taken science a long time to figure out even that they were there. So what I'm going to do now is go through a series of a fair number of slides, but talking first about what we're generally looking at in terms of amphibians and reptiles, and then coming back and actually showing you some, and sometime in here, I'm going to have Mark step in and talk about their evolutionary history, because this man knows as much about dinosaurs and about the evolution of dinosaurs as anybody that I know of, certainly south of the University of Chicago. So this is one group, Apoda. A means without, poda refers to foot. These are a type of amphibian known as the caecilians, and they live in a number of both aquatic and terrestrial environments. Really interesting because they are the only amphibians that have dermal scales. So the second layer of the skin is the dermis. And if you want to know something else that's of dermal origin, the shell of a turtle is partly dermal. The fontanelles on the top of our heads are from dermal bone. They are not from bone that comes from a cartilaginous precursor, which is where most of our axial skeleton and our appendicular skeleton comes from. And also those scales on the back of a crocodile or an alligator, those are of dermal origin. So it's not exactly like the epidermis of the skin. You're going to get to see some live things here in a minute, but this is one on the left that we actually have locally. It's the tiger salamander. Below, this is an animal that undergoes what we call neoteny. And neoteny is the retention of adult characteristics, juvenile characteristics in a sexually reproducing adult. And so if you'll look at right here, these are external gills. Remember I said that as larvae, amphibians will typically have external gills. Well, this one retains it even though this animal is sexually mature. And it's because of, for this particular species, it's because of certain salts, not sodium chloride, but other salts that are in the water. And these are found in 3 or 4 lakes around the central plateau of Mexico. And so if you remove these animals for several generations from that environment, they will undergo metamorphosis and develop into adults. There are also some amphibians, some salamanders, that are genetically programmed to retain certain juvenile characteristics as adults. So, obviously we know that frogs and toads are probably our most common anurans. Anura is another term for it's the group that we include the frogs and toads in. For living reptiles, this is one of the most unusual animals in the world. It's the tuatara. And the tuatara, its closest relative died about 200 million years ago. They're only found on 2 islands off the coast of New Zealand. They are incredibly unusual. Their skulls are different than any other vertebrate. Presumably, they were part of a group that lived at the beginning of when the dinosaurs were beginning to take over in the Mesozoic. But if they had lived anywhere else other than these islands, they would not be able to compete with the other reptiles. They are so much more advanced, the other lizards, etc. Here's a couple of other examples of lizards. Here is a chameleon. Chameleons are pretty interesting critters from the perspective of first of all, their eyes. Each eye can rotate 270 degrees. Okay, and so they can see almost completely around them. And as you might expect, they are ambush hunters. They also have very specialized feet, which can reach around and grab limbs. The males, this is a male, have lots of ornamentation, but these are not social animals at all. The only time they ever get together in numbers more than 1 are literally when it's time to mate. This is the Australian frilled lizard. Just one of my favorites. This guy is the one that will run and then suddenly go bipedal on you. So stand up like a little dinosaur and spread that dewlap under the throat to attempt to look really, really mean and presumably scare away a potential predator. And then of course we have the snakes. The king cobra obviously is one of the most enigmatic and incredible animals on the planet. Most people don't realize the female actually builds a nest. She uses her body to push debris and plant material together, and then she will guard the nest, which is highly unusual for snakes. The gaboon viper, this thing stands out incredibly on this background, but if you're in an African forest where there are lots of trees and lots of leaves on the ground, they are virtually impossible to see. And areas of their body are lightly colored because that's where the sun would come through. And these things also are the heaviest of all venomous snakes. The largest one ever known was a little over 6 feet long, but it weighed over 20 pounds. Now, the king cobra is the longest of all of the venomous snakes. It actually, the longest one was about 19 feet, 6 inches. And if you want to translate that into what this animal could do, it could rear over 6 feet. So it would be looking down at me significantly. And it wouldn't be looking down at me significantly for long because I would be out of there as quickly as I can. I've not dealt with a lot of elapid snakes, which is the family that the cobras are involved with. And then we have a lot of the other snakes that are in a group called the colubrids. And the colubrids are by far the largest family of snakes, but it includes many, many animals that are non-poisonous and a few that are poisonous, some deadly. If in fact they're going to have venom, and just so you know, venom is nothing more than modified saliva. They have a specialized salivary gland that produces the venom, and they literally force it out or force it through some tubules on the side of the head, and then it either runs down, often in a groove in the tooth in the back, or if you're looking at cobras, in a fixed fang at the front of the snout, or if you're looking at a viper, pit viper, even like a rattlesnake, their fangs are retractable. And so when they bite, they extend it out somewhat like that. And so you literally get maximum penetration of the tissue. But the colubrids that are what we call rear fangs, probably the most dangerous one is one called the boomslang from Africa. And the boomslang is a bird eater. And that's probably why the venom has evolved to be so deadly. If you're a bird eater and you grab a bird and then release it, okay, the odds are the bird's going to fly away even if it dies after 100 yards. But the odds of you being able to get that bird are really low. So the animals like a boomslang that have very, very serious venoms and will sit there and chew on the bird, they do that in order to maintain the ability to feed. But most of the colubrids, and certainly most of the colubrids around here, are anything but dangerous. And then, of course, we have our living reptiles. This is the sea turtle. This is a box turtle. We're actually you're gonna get to see a box turtle later. We have a lot of box turtles in this part of the world. I live out in a canyon near Slayton, not Ransom or not Buffalo Springs, but the next one over, part of the Yellow House system. And we constantly pick up box turtles and bring them to our property and let them go on there. And then, of course, there's crocodilians. And the crocodilians are just amazing in terms of how they have been able to survive pretty much the same way as they do now, looking the same way as they do now, with a few differences, for at least 150 million years. And if you look on the back right here where the arrow is, those are the osteoderms. Those are scales that actually have dermal, they're from the dermal layer of skin. Interestingly enough, one of my other students, his name is Sergio. Sergio is now a professor down at the University of Ibagué in Colombia. And he and several of the other members of the lab have come up with a mechanism where they look at the pattern of the osteoderms, and it turns out that these are almost like fingerprints for an individual. And you can identify individuals in at least 2 species by just looking at the osteoderms. So, before I turn this over for a little while to Mark, I want to address some really important issues that are something that we absolutely have to consider. First of all, anyone that's taking a Master Naturalist class knows that habitat loss and perturbation from humans has been devastating to many, many species. We've lost a tremendous number of amphibians and a significant number of reptiles. And part of the problem is environmental contaminants, pesticides, herbicides, just medicinal chemicals that get dumped into, there are so many places where they just take the refuse from hospitals and just dump them right into the water. All right, those things are very, very serious simply because, especially for amphibians, their skin is thin. If they breathe through their skin cutaneously when in the water, then clearly they can take up many of these types of substances, and that's very serious. Loss of ozone, it's again probably most serious for amphibian species because you get increased UV, and these lead to DNA damages, especially in animals that live at elevation. Again, I told you, you know, yes, they're certainly these animals prefer to live as a group, you know, in relatively temperate areas or tropical areas, but there are some that actually love to live at elevation, and those are very, very susceptible to loss of ozone and UV radiation, which basically causes DNA damage. They've shown that some of these frogs that live at elevation, they often will have 5 or 6 legs simply because of damage to the eggs. Obviously, global climate change, habitats which organisms have evolved in for millions of years are changing rapidly with climate change. And now the chytrid fungus. The chytrid fungus is really, really fascinating because if you think about most fungi, when I thought about it and first heard about it, I presumed that this was affecting animals in the tropics. It turns out that this actually affects animals that live in colder environments. And so it's probably also responsible for damage to a number of reptile populations. People never thought that, but the chytrid fungus is a serious problem, and because of climate change, areas that used to be cold, too cold for an amphibian to live in, are now becoming a little bit more reasonable. And when the populations move in there, some of them have optimal temperatures for the chytrid fungus. So it's a very, very serious problem. And part of it is that if you think of the fungus, if you think of a virus, even the coronavirus, if you think of these kinds of structures, because viruses are not alive, but they're molecular parasites. And parasites, when they get on an organism that is novel to them, invariably, that organism has not evolved the ability to fight off the fungus or to fight off the virus yet. Given enough time, humans will evolve, and we can already see this in terms of the differences in the way that coronavirus affects people, different people, some of them incredibly seriously, some of them asymptomatically. That's probably due to both different strains of coronavirus as well as differences in the genetics of the individuals being infected. So, and of course, age has something to do with it, and lots of other issues, but we still don't know. And the problem is, this is a very recent introduction into humans. And so we just don't have the ability yet. Eventually, we will probably have, at least some groups of us will have genetic resistance to those. So let me see what I've got next. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Mark. He can start right here, and then he's going to turn the computer around and we'll look at something on the board.
All right. Hey, everyone. So now we know you guys know the groups. Mark, by the way, in case you forgot. So we know the groups, but it's one thing to know the different types of reptiles and amphibians, and it's another thing altogether to know how they got here, right? Where did they come from? We can trace this all the way back to at some point in the Devonian period. This was before you had terrestrial vertebrates. All the vertebrates that were around were fishes, which is a loose term for basically any vertebrate that is not terrestrial. Of course, there are some fish that like to pretend to be terrestrial, but they're not really terrestrial. They're pretending. So, but when you get the terrestrial vertebrates, that's when you start to see in the Devonian period. And by this point, of course, you already had land plants that already come onto land. Invertebrates have already come onto land. You're starting to see your first insects. Scorpions, as a matter of fact, were originally marine animals.
Yeah.
And then they were one of the first large, relatively speaking, animals to come onto land. So now there's all these resources, you know, and it's a great place to get away from predators on land. So there was a transition from water to land. Now, a lot of people think that it was, a lot of people, the way they think of evolution, and this is kind of a human attribute, is they think of it as like, oh, these fish, they knew they had to evolve, and so they evolved. And it's almost like it gives it certain sort of an intent. Of course, there was no intent. There was no fish in the sea who was talking with his buddies and said, "Hey guys, I think
Let's get the land.
yeah, let's get on land, and it's gonna be a little safer up there." It was a very slow, gradual period over millions of years, slow accumulation of mutations, each one conferring some sort of advantage, no matter how small, that over time would build up. And a good example of that is, of course, the transition from fish to amphibians. And what this means is that a lot of the features that we associate with that transition, limbs, losing gills, being able to lift your head up, these are all features that while they were incredibly useful and almost necessary for a transition to land, were not adapted for that purpose originally. So in this case, you had the early fish amphibian transitional forms, which I won't name as either fish or amphibian because that's at some point you got to draw an arbitrary line between what is a fish, what is a fish-like amphibian, and what is an amphibian-like fish. We'll just call them transitional forms. Moving around on shallow seas, and so they have these lobed fins. So these are coming from the lobed fin fish, which we have living representatives today. The coelacanth, which is a deep ocean lobed fin fish, and of course the lungfish, which, as their name suggests, they actually have lungs. So of course they're not terrestrial; they have lungs for a completely different reason. To live in areas where the lake dries up or gets really low, stagnant water, and you can breathe air, then you can persist in that environment a little bit longer. But anyway, so they were moving into the shallow seas and shallow rivers, and being able to kind of walk along the bottom was the kind of the adaptive pressure for the development of what we first call the first proto-limbs. Being able to move your head up, being able to stick your head out of the water, being able to move from one lake to another. So say there's a lake that's over a small bridge of land, being able to move across that. There's a lot of fish will actually do today. You have walking catfish and mud skippers that are able to temporarily go on land to find a new body of water. So that is an adaptive function for that. But there is there's a plethora of traits that individually would not have been enough to make the transition to land, but of course, eventually it added up. And then you started to see a population or a group of organisms that were moving onto land more and more frequently until eventually they were what we'd call a true amphibian. So Tiktaalik rosier, this was a relatively recent discovery by Dr. Neil Shubin. This was found in Canada, and this is what a lot of folks consider the best example of a transitionary fossil in terms of the amphibian to fish revolution. Now, looking at this, you can't really tell if this is an amphibian or a fish if you don't know the very specific way to specialized information. But this is actually not an amphibian. It's still technically a fish, but it's well on the way. And pretty much all the amphibian fish transition specimens that occur after this in the evolutionary tree are what we consider the first tetrapods. Not necessarily what, if we call them true amphibians or not, but they're certainly tetrapods or at least tetrapodomorphs. So this is kind of the middle ground here. So this animal has the ability to move its head independently of its body. So if you see a fish, the fish cannot move their head independently of its body. They move their head, they move their body with it. This one can lift its head up and down. Side to side, probably not so much. Also has a very flat head. Now, some fish have flat heads, but most fish, they have a very kind of dorsolateral compressed head. So it's good for going through the water. This one, not so much. Eyes are on the top of the head, so it's looking up. So it's living on the bottom. It's got those robust lobe fins that are able to support its weight. And you'll see that in those fins, you'll have the same bones that you'll see in the bones of other tetrapods. So our finger and arm bones can trace, there's homologs there. You can find a humerus or an equivalent to it. You can find the phalanges in that fin. So it's the same bones, just very early stages. You still have scales, presumably, but this animal also still had gills, so it hadn't fully switched away from gills yet. But it's on its way. It's a transition onto land. So amphibians, as we mentioned earlier, they need water for reproduction, and they also need water, at least to some degree, to survive. Because again, they have that cutaneous respiration. The trade-off for that, being able to breathe through your skin, is that any respiratory surface needs to be moist. And this is the reason your lungs are inside your body. Your lungs are actually a moist membrane as well. And if your lungs get dry, then you can't breathe because there's no flow of oxygen and carbon dioxide across that membrane. So you need to have the skin wet. And of course, you need to lay their eggs in water because they don't have that external shell that you see in the amniotic eggs. So this is, if you ever seen an amphibian egg, it's like a little ball of jelly, and you can have gas and waste and nutrients will flow in and out freely, but so does water. And so if it's on land, then all that water will leave and evaporate, and then you have a little dried husk of an egg, and that's not good for anybody. So it has to be laid in water, or at least in a very moist place. As we mentioned earlier, some amphibians will lay their eggs in wet soil. One in Texas, the cliff chirping frog, that's a Eleutherodactylus, will lay its eggs in soil, and it doesn't require water. It's actually interesting because it doesn't have tadpoles at the stage. The young will hatch as what we call froglets. They'll skip the tadpole stage. But by and large, most amphibians are going to lay their eggs in water, and they're going to hatch as tadpoles, which are going to have gills, external gills, tails, no legs, and they're going to be usually herbivores. Of course, this is a kind of a niche partitioning that you'll see to prevent adults and larvae from competing with one another. So if your adult amphibians are going to be mostly carnivores, and your young amphibians are going to be mostly herbivores, so that they're not competing for food sources. There's a benefit to that. There's a tendency among animals to put your gametes, which is eggs and sperms, as well as larvae, in situations that they're not going to be unattended. Now, what this means is going to be variable depending on the organism you're talking about. For example, mammals, we have very few offspring, and but we tend to take more care of those offspring, whereas amphibians will have a lot of offspring, and they won't really put a lot of parental care into them. So it's kind of like, let me just have a bunch of babies and then hope for the best. And that's what we call R strategy. And of course, if you have very few babies but invest more in their care, that's called a K strategy. But either way, K or R strategy, when you lay your eggs, you're not going to just lay them in a place where you know they're going to get eaten. You're going to want to kind of try and hide them. So even these amphibians are having a lot of eggs. They're not really going to invest in a whole lot of care. Of course, some amphibians do invest a significant amount of care in their larvae. But you're not going to leave them. You want to place them somewhere kind of hidden, somewhere that you're not going to lay them in the middle of a pond where they're going to be eaten by largemouth bass. You're going to find a nice little cozy pool that's isolated from a main water body, under some reeds, perhaps, somewhere where it's a little less easy to find for a predator. The vast majority of amphibians and also reptiles, while we're at it, are what we call oviparous. That means that they lay eggs. A few are what we call ovoviviparous, which is some consider this an outdated term, and they've replaced it with a bunch of other terms, but for our purposes, it's fine. This is where you have eggs, but they hatch inside the body of the female. So you won't actually lay the eggs. You'll retain the eggs inside of your body. Now, what separates that from what we call viviparous, which is true live birth, which is what mammals are, is that in viviparous organisms, you're going to see a sort of connection between the developing embryo and the mother via umbilical cord or a sort of pseudoplacenta, or there's some sort of nutrients or resources that the mother's body is providing those embryos that's significant. Whereas in ovoviviparous, the eggs are inside the mother's body cavity, but they have a yolk, and they really are just limited to doing gas exchange. They don't take any nutrients from the mother directly. They have that separate yolk. So they're kind of like a compartment, a self-isolated compartment within the body, whereas in viviparous organisms, there's a true connection. And then the mother is actually actively sustaining that embryo. And you don't really see viviparous amphibians or reptiles. It's mostly going to be ovoviviparous, where it's kind of a little mix between there. So amphibians are known for doing what we call external reproduction. And when you get to the amniotes, then you're going to see that kind of true transition to land. You're going to do internal fertilization. Amphibians do external fertilization by and large, with a few exceptions. And basically what this means is that they will deposit their gametes in the water. The male will deposit his sperm in the water, and the female will deposit her eggs in the water, and then they'll mix. And then that's where the fertilization occurs. It occurs outside of the body. So there's no transfer of sperm from the male inside the female. It's all done externally, with a few exceptions, which I'll mention here in a bit. But what you will see a thing called amplexus. Now, for the uninitiated, you probably see frogs doing these kind of maneuvers. You probably assume that they're mating. But what this is actually is the male's way of stimulating the female via touching her in the right places to induce her to release her eggs. And there's a vast diversity of ways that you can see. And this courtship, as it were, this massaging of the female in certain ways to stimulate egg production is called amplexus. And it's a really, truly staggering variety of different ways that frogs will do this. But again, with a few exceptions, these are going to be external fertilization. So this is not actually mating. This is the precursor. This is the courtship. And this can go on for some time. Some amphibians, the male will ride on the female for a few days, and the female will just go about doing her regular business, going around eating, sleeping, and then she just has a male clinged on top of her. It's kind of like a hug, really. Bunch of different ways.
Most of the time, the females are larger as well.
Yes, it's quite interesting.
And they can support the male on there. As you can see, this guy right here is just
breviceps, yeah.
Yes, breviceps is amazing.
Mm-hmm. And the exception that I was talking about, at least one that stands out for North American herpetofauna, is what we call the tailed frog. And their name suggests that there's something off about them, is because the males have retain a small tail. So most frogs will lose their tail once they fully undergo metamorphosis, but the tailed frog male will not. Of course, the female will. And the reason that this is because these frogs live in very fast-moving mountain streams. And so if you were to have external fertilization in a fast mountain stream, you would deposit your gametes in the water, and then they would wash down to God knows where. And so there's a tendency that you want to kind of have more control over the fertilization process. And so what the males will do is they'll use that tail as a way to perform internal fertilization as an intermittent organ. But again, vast majority of frogs are going to be doing external fertilization. Was there more about the prehistory stuff? Or?
No, that's why I was going to.
Oh, okay. So let me try and turn this around here. So talking about.
And I'm not sure. You'll have to.
I can read about that. Okay. Let's see if they can. You guys can see. Can you guys see that? Okay. I drew it on the whiteboard. Okay. So start here. This is about the Devonian. You have your first transitionary reptile or amphibian to fish, and then you start to see a bunch of what we call early tetrapods here. And this was kind of your dominant assortment of terrestrial vertebrates in the Devonian, Carboniferous, and partway into the Permian. And collectively, you could refer to these as amphibians, but some of these quote-unquote amphibians are going to be more closely related to your reptiles than they are to your modern amphibians. So the lepospondylus, temnospondylus, bunch of different groups that I won't really get into because they're very similar to each other. There's very minor differences skeletally that you can see. But you have your modern amphibians, start here, and they're what we call monophyletic, which means that they all share a common ancestor. And of course, your apoda or your caecilians are the outside branch of this tree. And then you have your caudata and your anura, your frogs and salamanders are together here. And so these consist of your modern amphibians, which are also called Bliss amphibia, is the technical term for that group. And then you have your amniotes. So this is the development of the amniotic egg. It occurs right here. And then you see a branching in between what we call the synapsids, which are going to lead to your mammals. And you have your sauropsids, that's what they call them now, which leads to your reptiles. And this is historically the difference between these has been, or the easiest difference to notice is the number of fenestra or holes in the skull. behind the eye. So synaptids will have one. And in mammals, this is the cavity that is formed by your zygomatic arch. So right here on your cheekbone, you can see you got your muscles, your jaw muscles will go up through that. That's your fenestra there. And then of course, reptiles, it's variable depending on the reptile you look at. So then you get your first split here. You get your parareptilians, and this includes the majority of what we call anapsid reptiles. So let me draw these. So if you have a reptile skull, yeah, a reptile skull, this is an anapsid because it just has the eye here, has no temporal fenestra, whereas a synapsid, which again leads to the mammals, would have one here. It's the one temporal fenestra there. And so that is your parareptilians. Now, traditionally, up until a few years ago, this is what we used to think turtles were, because they have a skull like this. They don't have any temporal fenestra. So we used to think turtles were here. Now, molecular studies places the turtle elsewhere, suggesting that there's a secondary loss of that temporal fenestra. So once you get there, then you see what we call the diapsid skull. And what that is, di means two. And so that is the diapsid skull, where you have two temporal fenestra. And that includes a few branches. Now, these ones, the ichthyosaurs, are your dolphin-like marine reptiles, and your plesiosaurs are the ones with the really long necks. Put a little asterisk by them because their placement on this tree is, depending on who you ask, is going to be different. But I just kind of put them somewhere. One of the accepted ways that they're there. Personal favorite places to put them. But you have a branch here. Forgetting the marine reptiles for a second, you have a branch here, and you start to see a branch coming off here. This collectively, your tuatara and your squamates is called the Lepidosauria. This is Lepidosauria. So these are your lizard-like groups. Now, true lizards are going to be with the squamates here. Is this backwards for you guys? Oh boy. I just realized it's backwards on the camera.
Oh no.
Oh well. Yeah, so squamates there. Sorry about that. I don't know how to write backwards. Your tuatara is off here on its own. Then you have your Archosauromorpha. This is where we put the turtles now. And then you have your archosaurs, ruling reptiles, where you have your crocodiles and alligators, and crocodilians. Your pterosaurs, or your extinct flying reptiles, as a sister group to everyone's favorite, the dinosaurs, which, as you may well know, includes modern birds. So birds, if we call this entire group here reptiles, then by that logic, birds are a very advanced reptile. But we don't really include those. That's the ornithologist domain. We herpetologists just like to keep the
we keep it separate.
they like to keep the scaly stuff and the slimy stuff. But yeah, so that is the gist of it. And of course, you have your euryapsid skull, which is what you see in your marine reptiles. Again, a secondary loss of your fenestra there. So I hope you guys got a good look at that. But yeah, so I can answer questions about that later when we do questions. But for now, I'll turn it back over to Lou so he can show you some representatives.
Yeah, well,
And I'll start whipping some of these out.
we're gonna look at some organisms that are actually found pretty much on the Llano Estacado. There's a couple that I've included that may not be here, but and we'll go through this pretty rapidly. I'm thinking maybe at about 10:30 we take a 5-minute break. Is that okay with you, Kipra?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
That way everybody can do what they need to do. I know I had lots of coffee this morning and it always comes back to haunt you. So the term amphibia literally means two lives, and they part of it is in the water and part of it is on land. That's really an interesting perspective, though, if you think about it, because if you're a frog, maybe most of the time you live in the water. But what happens when a predator like a bass starts chasing you in the water? What you actually have the ability to do then is to go out of the water onto land. And so while that may seem like a very trivial event, you literally, in some cases, are able to remove yourself from a predator simply by changing the environment that you're living in. And not lots of animals, there's not a lot of animals that can do that. All right, so that makes these really impressive in some ways. All right, so here is a family called the Microhylidae. This is the Great Plains narrow-mouthed toad. It makes a sound that's sort of like wah, wah, wah. Very, very small nose. It just barely sticks out of the water. They're really hard to find. But one of the most amazing facts about the narrow-mouthed toads is that they are found in close proximity. Here's your narrow-mouthed toad, and here's your female tarantula. This photograph was taken by a good friend named David Hillis, who is a member of the National Academy. He's down at the University of Texas, and I've known him from the time he was a graduate student. Really, really cool. But this is almost never seen. The idea is that one of the foremost problems for tarantulas are ants. And one of the major foods for the narrow-mouthed toads are ants. And so this is somewhat of a symbiotic relationship. It may also be that there are compounds that the narrow-mouthed toad secretes or excretes that keep it, that don't allow the tarantula to know it's there. But I think most people think that it's actually more of a symbiotic relationship. So they eat the ants, obviously the tarantula protects the narrow-mouthed toad from a potential predator, because most of the predators that would go after a narrow-mouthed toad would get eaten by a tarantula.
I found that one with the Diplocentrus scorpion too.
Yeah. So this is one of the spadefoot toads. This is couches. This is one of the animals that you'll find relatively close by. I mean, we have them all over here. They call extremely loudly because most of the year the spadefoots are underground. And when there's a first really serious rain, they'll come out, and we humans can hear their call a mile away. Okay, so there is no telling how far a female spadefoot can actually hear the male calling. They also have a pretty nasty neurotoxic skin. So if you ever pick up a spadefoot toad, and one of the ways you'll know a spadefoot toad from a normal toad, one of the toads that we used to call bufo, but they're now in a different genus, is these have an elliptical pupil, whereas the true toads have a round pupil. Now this obviously is taken in sunlight, and so or actually at night. So this is wide open, but it has an elliptical pupil, so you can actually tell that it's a spadefoot.
We have 3 of those in Lubbock.
And we have 3, right. Here is the bullfrog, Rana catespiana, used to be, now it's Lithobates, but I still call it Rana.
I think they switched it back.
They have switched it back.
The amphibian people switched it back.
That's what I figured, yeah.
They are.
Yeah, so this is a very large, for the US frog. There is a relative of this called Conrana Goliath that is about twice as large and lives in Africa. But this one we do have here, and we've seen them.
I think it's non-native.
Yeah, that's right. They've been introduced, but now this is one that is actually native. This is the Plains leopard frog, and see the pattern on the back, and very relatively common frog that you'll see in both of these frogs. Will lay large numbers of eggs in the water. Okay, Mark was talking about that before. What we find out is that if you're going to be just oviparous and you're going to lay eggs, oftentimes you will lay lots of eggs. And the idea there, he was talking about R versus K selection. The R selected animals basically throw lots of babies out there, assuming that many of them are not going to survive. That's sort of incorporated into their evolutionary history. And whereas the K selected, you don't throw so many babies out there, but you either have parental care. Some of the really unusual frogs will carry the tadpoles on the back, including some of the poison arrow frogs. They carry their tadpoles on the back to just carry them around with them, and that protects, obviously, the babies to some degree. And the same is true with the very, very small number of animals that are amphibians that are considered to be viviparous. There's actually a toad in Africa where the tail will grow into the side of the mother's peritoneal cavity, the lower cavity below. We have one too. It's really below where your diaphragm is. They grow, the tail grows in there, and that's how they get nutrition through that pseudoplacenta. Here is one of our common toads, the Gulf Coast toad. It's now, used to be Bufo valiceps, now it's Encilius, and it's, we think, actually a migrant from Mexico. Interestingly enough, these animals are very capable of forming hybrids with a lot of other toads. In the idea of having hybrids and forming hybrids, most of the time, especially in mammals, we don't see that very successfully, okay? Because what the population is trying to do is maintain its integrity. Here, probably because this animal moved in from another area, they still have the ability to hybridize, although after about 4 or 5 generations, so you have the first generation F1, then F2, F3, etc. After about F5, they start to break down. It's called hybrid dysgenesis, and it's a process by which those you sort of are protecting the gene pool long term. But this animal is very successful and is found throughout Texas. This is one that I included. It's not really around here. It's further in South Texas, but what makes the gray tree frog really interesting is that it is one of the very few animals that has literally had an event that duplicated all of its chromosomes. So sometime, and we don't know how long ago, but sometime in the past, one of the gray tree frogs literally duplicated the number of chromosomes, which instantaneously creates a new species. All right. You can actually find these down in Southeast Texas. And the two species have totally different calls and everything else. And literally, these guys are, the one species is tetraploid, which means it has 4 chromosomes per cell, whereas most of them are diploid. This is one that we will find here, the red spotted toad. Used to be Bufo punctatus, now Anorixis. And this animal is pretty interesting because of all the toads, it is capable of living in the driest environment. Okay, it doesn't need very much water at all. And we have them around here pretty frequently. This is the chorus frog. I didn't know that they got into the Lubbock area, but apparently they have been found on the Llano Estacado. It's one of the very earliest breeding frogs that you'll find in our area. This is Blanchard's cricket frog. And it's another one that I didn't realize got here, but it makes a sound much like a cricket. And in fact, if you get a rock, and I should have brought one, a couple of rocks and can rub them together, you can get these guys to start calling. And we teach our herpetology class down in Junction at our field station, at Texas Tech's field station. And we'll go down there and all you can hear is these guys and a few of the true toads calling. This is the animal that he was talking about. Yeah, there you go. He's got a recording of one that you can hear. This is can you guys hear that sound?
Yes.
Okay, that's a cricket frog. And you can literally take 2 rocks and move them together and they will sound a little bit like this. Now, this is the cliff frog that he was talking about, which is really remarkable. When we find them in the Junction area, at least, the first thing you have to do is you have to wet the bag that you put them in. Because if you put them in a cotton bag, within 20 minutes, they will be completely desiccated, looking like mummies. And yet these are animals that live under rocks where it looks like there's no moisture at all. It's clear that they are very susceptible to desiccation, however. And so after we lost the first 3 or 4 of those, we definitely started putting them in wet bags. Now here's the tiger salamander again, Ambystoma tigrinum. This is actually an animal that we have relatively commonly in our area. In fact, out at Reese, there was a very viable population that was studied, partly because the jet fuel that was coming off of the planes when Reese was in fact an air base would get into some of those ditches beside there, and it was causing mutations in these animals. And here's the axolotl, the neotenic form, as I mentioned before. Here is one of those that actually is not, it's not an animal that is neotenic. We call this pedogenetic. It's P-A-E-D-O genetic. And the reason we call it that is that this is hardwired. So genetically, these animals have, they have external gills. They have lost the eyes. These are typically found in caves. And David Hill is the guy that had the picture of the narrow-mouthed toad with the tarantula. He's worked on these a lot because in the Austin area, there's many areas where there are caves and these things live and probably feed on animals, invertebrates that are also have no color and are also effectively blind. But these very spindly legs allow them to feel with great sensitivity. Now, a few reptiles. This is an animal that we do get here. It's not common, but I actually found one, a big female, right close to where I lived. And I live off of Farm to Market Road 9300. Okay, and the problem is that's a caliche road. And there is a small stream that represents overflow from Ransom Canyon that runs through there. Well, this animal clearly was living there, but she was outside of the water and she was on the side of the road. And I was really concerned that somebody was going to come by and kill her. And so I was driving home from being in Slayton. I saw this animal. She was so old, she had moss all over her back. But I immediately picked her up by the tail and dropped her in the water. And then I realized that I had never even taken a picture of her. But I was so worried that there were going to be somebody come by to kill her that because there are people, believe it or not, that will just run over turtles for the pure, unadulterated joy of it, which, well, I have my own opinion about them. Here's the box turtle, the ornate box turtle. You'll get to see one of these in a little while. And of course, everyone that lives around here has seen them. There is occasionally, you may see a different type of box turtle. One of my colleagues has a 3-toed box turtle, but it's almost for sure that that animal was introduced because it's further from the east in the US. The mud turtles. Oh, they're something. The mud turtles and the stink pots. First of all, if you look at this animal, and we have them here, I've seen them on my right-of-way. If you look at this animal can stick its head out all the way back to about here. They have extremely long necks and they have scent glands that are underneath at the base of the tail that are just some of the most vile smells that you'll ever see. But the first one of these that I caught, I was holding it and I was grabbing it just about there and the head came back. And you know that area between your thumb and your finger, right there? That's pretty sensitive. If you grab hold of it, you can feel it's pretty sensitive. That turtle missed mine by about a half a centimeter. And so I learned a very significant lesson about picking up mud turtles or musk. They have a close relative called the musk turtle. Now, this is a spiny soft shell. This is a really interesting animal from the perspective of, you know, most people think about turtles and they think about the shell. Okay, that's the obvious thing. And the shell probably evolved. First of all, there's now more and more evidence that it may have evolved to help an animal burrow, okay, because it could support some of the weight. But certainly their dominant way of surviving is they will live in a small pond or a marsh or something along that line. Well, what we find, however, is that there are a number of turtles, including the soft shells, that have literally lost the hard shell because of weight. So these guys are incredibly efficient swimmers. They also will have that little tiny at the end of the snout, they'll have their two external nares, the openings to the nose or to the respiratory tract, and they'll just stick those out of the water. These also have very long necks. And I will tell you that if you know any Cajuns, Cajuns love soft shells because that's where they do most of their eating of soft shells in terms of turtle soup and turtle etouffee. And I've had all kinds of things. I did my PhD at the LSU Medical School and was there for 5 years. So this is an old female. You can tell she's really lost most of her pattern, but this is one we actually caught Downing Junction. And they're here in the Lubbock area. Just hard to find. Now, this is the common slider, and you're going to get to see another common slider alive in just a little while. These are the ones that you know, red-eared turtles is what they called them. These are the babies that when I was young, God, everybody had to have one. The problem is they found out that they carry salmonella pretty regularly. And so the kids were having issues with salmonella, but this is what a baby red ear looks like. This is a Texas river cooter. This is actually in the Lubbock area, but it's been introduced. And this is one that was actually collected in Maxey Park. And it's a Chinese turtle, the common thread turtle, Moramys sinensis, but it is introduced as well. It's found in a lot of places in the US and has been one that introductions are really not good for the animals because in most cases, unless you have a population that's already established of introduced animals, they won't be able to breed, and so they'll die. Some of the lizards, this is a banded gecko. Beautiful, beautiful animal. We find these pretty regularly in Big Bend. Geckos are really fascinating if you look at them worldwide. They're almost symbiotic with humans. Right, especially, yeah. They can do in many places where geckos are found, especially in the Far East. They will actually build a wall outside of the house and put lights on it because the lights will attract the insects and spiders and everything else, and the house geckos will live out there and feed off of them. And so they're found, geckos as a group are one of the very few lizards that make a noise, and they sometimes will make a squeaking noise. I've only heard it once. We have a gecko that's introduced in the Lubbock area, and that's the Mediterranean gecko. We've been called several times to come to places because people are not sure what they've got living in their house, but it will be a Mediterranean gecko. The babies are virtually almost translucent. You can see right through them and see their organs, but they are wonderful for destroying roaches. And this is actually destroying one of those beetles that have the it's a longhorn beetle. But this is what it looks like. And they'll get no more than 4, maybe 5 inches long. Now, this is the Texas alligator lizard, and it actually does get into the Lubbock area. I've never seen one up here. And in fact, we've only collected one. And we didn't collect one, we actually collected about 6. And they were at the, what's the German town? They were in the Fredericksburg, right beside the Fredericksburg, Texas courthouse, living there. And we knew that we had to get them out of there. And so we collected them and released them elsewhere. Yeah, they can bite pretty hard. They have an incredibly long tail, and that tail can break off very significantly. You may have heard of glass lizards. Glass lizards are truly lizards because lizards will have eyelids, and they will also have openings like right there for where the ear is. Okay, snakes do not, but the glass lizards are close relatives of these. But most lizards have the capability of losing part of the tail because they have skin that grows between each of the vertebrae. And when the tail breaks off, that skin prevents them literally from bleeding to death, because sometimes significant portions of the tail are lost. Now, when it regenerates, it does not regenerate as bone that comes from the cartilage. It just regenerates as cartilage. So you can tell a lizard that has lost its tail by looking at it that way. This is one that we find pretty commonly here, the Great Plains skink. They'll also attempt to bite you. The biggest one I think I've ever seen is about 9 inches long. And they get, as Mark said, pretty hefty. Here is the many-lined skink. It's another one of the skinks. We actually have 3 skinks here. This is not as common as the Great Plains, but it still is in this area. And then we have the 4-line. Well, I didn't include the 4-line. We have another one called the 4-line skink that the babies are dark blue. And when you find them, it's just surprising because it's a very, very dark blue. And you would not think that they will grow up to be a skink that looks similar to this, except rather than many lines, it only has 4. Now, this is one that we have very, very commonly in the Lubbock area. This is the Texas spotted whiptail, Herpetology gularis. Whiptails are remarkable in the speed that they use. They run extremely fast, and you have seen these undoubtedly close to your house. There are other whiptails, however. This one is called the gray checkered. It's actually Herpetology tessellatus. And what makes this animal different from this animal is that we have both males and females of gularis. But in many of the whiptails, in fact, about 1/3 of the whiptails that are either in North America, Central America, or South America, the populations are all female. And in some cases, they don't have 2 chromosomes per cell. They'll actually have 3 per nucleus. So they're triploid, which is really unusual. And when I was a postdoc up at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, I was studying these, and we actually showed some really interesting characteristics about their genetics because of the fact that they do have multiple sets of chromosomes per nucleus. This is a side blotch lizard. This is a male that's showing off. You can see this bright navy blue, actually stronger than that, pattern on the side. And what he's trying to do is definitely tell another male that you better get out of here, because I've found a female here and I'm showing her that I'm the best looking guy in town. This is the earless lizard. We do have the earless lizard here as well as the side blotched. And it has very, very small openings. It's almost impossible to tell, but notice this pattern here. if you look, this pattern underneath continues under the tail. And what these animals will do is they will run with their tails up like this, waving them. And they've got this pattern that's this dark, separated by light. And then what they will do after they run so far, and some of them will actually go bipedal on you, where they run on their hind legs, they will drop the tail. And when they do, your eye just keeps going. Okay, and so it's really an effective way of getting away from a predator, because the predator focuses on that tail waving as they run, and when that tail goes down, they get into a crouch, and it's really hard to see them. This is the Texas spiny lizard. This is a common lizard that we have here. The males typically will have blue underneath, although there are some spiny lizards that are incredibly bright colored in terms of their blue. This one will get blue, but not as colorful as some others. You've seen this one a lot, I'm sure. The Texas horned lizard. Well, these animals, as you know, are protected in the state of Texas. And that's pretty much because, first of all, the pet trade had a lot of effect on them. Secondarily, the animal that feeds on this the most are roadrunners. And as roadrunners increase in numbers, the horned lizards, at least at our place, decreased in numbers. Another concern is that they primarily eat harvester ants, okay, which are the big ones that you'll see gathering materials in, and they bring them back to a nest that may be 3 feet across in terms of the debris that's around there. And if you ever get bitten by a harvester ant, you will not forget it. They're pretty serious, but the harvester ants, as fire ants have moved north, they have destroyed the harvester ants and perhaps even destroyed some of the horned lizards. This is the round-tailed horned lizard. It's a much, much smaller one, and it typically, we find that down around Big Bend. So it's not in our area, at least it wouldn't be commonly. Now some snakes. And when I finish going through all these snakes, what we'll do is then actually take some of the animals out. In fact, why don't we stop right here for a second for about 5 minutes and let everybody go to the restroom or get a cup of coffee or need what they do. And I'll come back at about 11:15, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Densmore and Mark Lee.
Is this what you were looking for, Kipra?
Definitely. It's wonderful.
Okay. Okay. We just... And now we're going to talk about some of the local snakes. And we're going to start off with one of my very favorites, the speckled king snake, Lamprobeltis geschalus. This is found throughout Texas. The pattern will be different in different parts of the state. Some of them have more of a chain link pattern, and one that's more called the desert king. But this animal is, as far as snakes that make good pets, this is one of them. And of course, they get their name king snake because they prefer to eat other reptiles, specifically snakes, but also lizards. I've got to. Here's the prairie king snake, Lampropeltis caligaster. This one is often confused with one of the rat snakes that you'll see shortly. In fact, we have one of the live rat snakes that you'll get a chance to take a look at. This animal, one of the differences between the king snakes and the rat snakes is that if you look at the scales of the rat snakes, they have a very small ridge down the middle of it. It's called the keel, like the keel of a boat. These are all, the king snakes, on the other hand, are all smooth scales. So both of them are harmless, okay? But you'll see how close the prairie king snake looks to the one of the rat snakes that I'll show you in just a second. This is a glossy snake. This is another one of those snakes that's related to the king snakes. We have one that you'll get a chance to see live. The glossy snakes are really, of all of the snakes that are in one of the groups, the king snakes, the rat snakes, and the glossy, as far as I'm concerned, the glossies are the most nervous, and the ones that we have here is incredibly nervous. And you see, so he's all over everywhere. Say what? No, that's a glossy. That's a Texas glossy. They're highly variable, really variable. Okay, so one of the more common snakes that you'll see around here is the checkered garter snake. All right, and this is something that you're going to find in your gardens. You'll see moving across the grass. They're not only common, they're really, again, pretty good pets. A lot of them will actually feed on guppies. And so people have them, and they do have a rather significant musk that's pretty smelly. So now this is a snake that's related to the garters. It's the western ribbon snake. And this guy is, what you'll find, where you'll find the ribbon snakes is especially close to water. If you're walking along the edge of a stream or in one of the parks, you'll often see these guys. They're very, very fast. They're very long. They're very thin, generally about as big around at the most as your little finger, especially until they get larger. But they're close relatives of the garters. One of my favorites, the eastern hognose. Hognose snakes are remarkable for a number of reasons. First of all, they're one of the great actors of the snake world. This snake is attempting to look really badass, okay? They will spread the neck like a hood to make it look bigger. And of course, there's lots of cobras that do that and lots of venomous snakes that do that, but very few. And this actually, believe it or not, is one of the snakes that has enlarged rear teeth. It's really not fair to call them rear fangs because it's not really a fang, but these guys they have huge mouths and they feed on frogs and toads. And so one of the things that a toad will do when you pick it up, the first thing it probably does is pee on you. But the second thing it does is take in air so that it looks bigger. Well, these guys with that enlarged rear tooth can puncture that air, and you'll watch the toad just go into a much smaller and edible meal. The other thing these guys do is they play dead. Okay, this animal, if you continue, it'll first oftentimes try to look big, but if you pester it, it will roll over with its tongue out, the mouth gaped, and the belly up, apparently trying to play dead. The interesting part about that behavior is that if you turn the snake back over like it's normally should be, it will immediately roll back up. So it can only play dead with its belly up. If you continue to mess with them, you'll get their most recent meal. I've only had a couple that actually vomited on me, but they will do that as well. This is the other hognose that we have here. It's the Western hognose. I've actually found them on the same day in Lubbock County years and years ago. But it's a very, very, these make great pets, quite frankly. And some of them, we actually had one that we called Miss Piggy because she was quite rotund, but she actually learned and got pretty good at eating mice. So most of the time they don't like it. Some of the herpetologists will do things like they will take the skin of a toad and wrap it around a baby mouse, and the snake, if they're toad eaters or something like that, they'll often grab hold of that, and then gradually you wean them off of that, and then ever so often they'll start to take mice. This is the ringneck snake, one of the most beautiful around here. This is another one that throws this tail into perhaps something that looks like a rattler, but they're very, very small. They are also enlarged rear teeth, but they're the size of a pencil, okay? And they're just gorgeous. There are a whole group of them that live in Texas, and the one we have up here is absolutely beautiful. We catch them pretty regularly. A lot of times you'll find them under, say, flower pots or under something that's been sitting on the ground for a while. This is a black-headed snake, another one that, believe it or not, has enlarged rear teeth, although it can't open its mouth more than about 3 millimeters. So this is even smaller than the ringneck. But herpetologists get really excited about them. So, and it's one that you'll see. It's just very small. You might mistake it for a worm, although you'll really mistake this one for a worm. This is the Texas blind snake, Rena dulcus, and we catch them regularly in Junction. We have found them, one of them up here. This animal on the upper left was actually caught up in Amarillo, so it still is on the Llano. You can see, notice down here the eye, and it's also right there. They have no what, upper teeth? One of the, either the upper or lower jaw has no teeth on it. Okay, but they're tiny, tiny, tiny. I mean, these are even maybe smaller than the Tantilla, the dark-headed snake you just saw. Now, this is a snake that this is the Western rat snake, and this is a specimen that was actually caught in the Lubbock area. All right, and I have not seen in the Lubbock area a Texas rat snake, but this one was actually caught in this area. Most of the time when you see the rat snake, or the Western or the Texas rat snake, it doesn't look like this, and I don't think you can quite tell, but maybe you can. If you see some of these scales, you see they have a very small ridge in the middle, and that's the keel. And that's one way that you can tell the difference between this one and a king snake. This is what most Texas rat snakes look like. This one was caught further to the east, but By the time you get over to say Longview or get into really East Texas, they're much, much darker. In fact, there's actually a black rat snake that is the same or very closely related to this one that's found on the East Coast. But these guys will have orange between their scales. And so this is a very common snake in the Dallas area, and one that you'll see. And quite honestly, they're not shy. Now they won't attack you, but many snakes, including this one, will shake the tail, will rattle the tail, much like a rattler, except not a rattler, of course. And that sometimes will get them killed simply because people don't know what they're looking at and they immediately kill them. They are very good at killing rodents. Now here's our Great Plains rat snake, and you see how similar this looked to the Prairie King. We're going to show you one of these very shortly that's live that we have, but this is a very handsome animal, and they make great pets. This is a snake that if you get small, you can handle regularly, and they really do well. They feed well as also. Now, this is the Western Coach Whip, and this is a coach whip from the Lubbock area. This is a snake that you will see, and you'll see it, and then you won't see it, because this is one of the fastest snakes in our area. And you'll often see them crossing roads, but all you'll see is it looks like a tan-colored stick that just moves really fast. When we get down to the Big Bend area, however, they get pink. Okay, and so that's what this one looks like. The other thing that I love about this picture is that you will see coach whips with their heads up. They feed during the day. They, the king snakes and the rat snakes, they will constrict their prey. All right, they're constrictors. These guys are not constrictors. One of the things that having venom or being constrictor and crushing the or asphyxiating, suffocating the prey allows you to do is eat larger prey. These guys, because they don't constrict, can't eat prey nearly that large, okay? But you will often see them with the head up. In fact, I can remember one that we caught one time down at Junction. His head was 2 feet off the ground and he was hunting. And it gives you a little bit of pause when you see a snake like that, because it looks an awful lot like a number of very, very dangerous snakes, like the taipans from Australia, as well as some other serious elapid snakes, members of that family. Here is a close relative of the, let's see, let me press that. Now, let's go back. This is a close relative of the coach whip. This is the yellow-bellied racer. In fact, some people actually put them in the same genus now, but this is one that I had not found for many years in the Lubbock area. And then we were on our way. We went out to my house to pick up some of the stuff before we went down and taught the course in Junction during intercession. And we found one right on my road. And so we had that animal for the better part of 8 or 9 years, and it finally died recently. But you can see this is the same situation as the coach whip. It doesn't constrict, and so it's going to be feeding on lizards or small snakes, or if it can get a baby bird, it would do that, but that would probably be the most likely thing. Also baby mice. Now here's the bull snake. We have one, and bull snakes are unfortunately one of the most likely to be killed snakes in our area simply because of a couple aspects of it. First of all, you can see this tail. Notice the black rings on it. It's called a coon tail because it looks a lot like a raccoon. Well, another snake that has that is the western diamondback. The other aspect of the biology of these is that their pattern looks, to the untrained eye at least, pretty similar to what you see in a western diamondback. But the reason that they really get killed is that they will open the mouth and blow air through the mouth. And when they do that, it sounds almost identical to a rattlesnake rattling. And so many snakes, many bull snakes do in fact end up dead. You're going to see one today, and he was actually hissing for us earlier, and I don't know if he'll still do it, but I could hope so. And if he does, it'll be cool to see. This is one of the snakes that is a tricolor. That's the Texas longnose. You know, I talked about that aposematic coloration. This is presumably at some level mimicking the coral snake. Now, the coral snake, of course, is a venomous snake. It's related to the cobras. This one is commonly found here. You're going to see one. We have one that's a very large specimen that we caught out at my place. Now, here's the Mexican milk snake. You're going to see one of these too. And most of the time, they are not found in the Lubbock area. However, Francis Rose, who was the herpetologist before I came here, lived out north near the airport. And in fact, he was out running one day and he actually found one of these. So they are here, they're just extremely rare. The one that you're going to see is named Harvey because he came from Rockport. When Hurricane Harvey hit, one of the local first responders went down, and he took glue traps because they were thinking there's going to be a lot of rodents out there. Well, this thing got caught on a glue trap. He brought it back in his backpack, not even knowing he had it. It's amazing that he was smart enough to realize it wasn't a coral snake and didn't kill it. But when he came back to Lubbock, he got it to the South Plains Wildlife Rehab Center, and they got it off with alcohol, called me and asked us if we want it. And I said, oh, of course. It's a great snake to have. So now some to avoid. This is the desert Massasauga. This is found a little bit to the west. Typically, it's not really found in the Lubbock area directly, although they are here. It's a small rattlesnake. It's related to the pygmy rattlers and is actually in a different genus than the rest of them. However, it will bite, and the venom the venom is apparently not a good one to get envenomated by, although no venom is a good one to get envenomated by. This is the prairie rattler. This animal was actually caught near Post. We find them in areas that are a little sandier as compared to the western diamondback, which are areas that are a little rockier. Now, those are pretty loose statements, so don't think that, you know, everyone that you find down in the sand or near the sand, is going to be a prairie, but more likely they are. One of the things about the prairie rattlesnake, this animal, this species is found all the way from Texas to Oregon. To what? And up into Canada even. And basically what they're called is the green rattler or whatever. But the problem with them is that their venoms are highly polymorphic, which means that sometimes certain populations will have venoms that just affect the blood, which most rattlesnakes like the western diamondback do primarily, but they also have some populations, including the one that's here, will have neurotoxic effect that will affect the nervous system. Now, it's not nearly to the same effect that we see of a coral snake or a cobra, but it's still nasty because we caught one down around Post and milked it this was about 25 years ago, and sent it out to this place in Utah, and they checked it and said it did have neurotoxic components. So you want to be very careful all the time around rattlesnakes, but certainly prairies. They don't get quite as big as western diamondbacks, but I would not want to be bitten by a prairie or any other one for that matter. I never have been. We are very, very careful. And here's another picture of a prairie. You can see those two lines on the face. They're really, really distinct. But this is probably a pretty good sized female. Yeah, and that's right. There's a scale around the nose that's white as well. This is one of the example of one of the western diamondbacks. This, of course, is the one that is probably most common in our area. They love rodents. Rodents love barns. People have lots of barns because they have bovids or horses or goats or whatever. You're going to see this animal. This is the animal that probably bites more people in this area than any other. The unfortunate part is they get pretty big and therefore can give you a significant load. If there's a positive, it's that the venom is not quite as serious as some of the other rattlesnakes, one of which you'll see shortly. This one is a pattern that you would probably see a little bit further to the south, maybe just off the Cap Rock. This one is one that was caught in the Lubbock area, a little bit darker. And these, as I said, we will find those in areas of shrubs, around some sort of evergreen trees sometimes, but often around rocks, all right? And in extreme South Texas, you want to be absolutely even more careful because the western diamondbacks get there are over 7 feet in some cases, and I've seen one. Although the largest that I've ever caught was about 6'5", and that was a significant rattlesnake. Now, this is the one that you want to be most careful of, in my opinion. It's probably the most dangerous snake in North America. It's the Mojave rattler. And the problem is it has a protein in its venom that's called Mojave toxin. It's actually a small protein, a peptide, just a few amino acids long. The venom has been characterized as up to 50 times more dangerous than western diamondback, drop for drop. So this is a serious, serious animal. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there are 2 strains. One of them has Mojave toxin. It's called the A strain, and the B strain does not. Unfortunately, there are places in Texas, and this is found probably not directly in the Lubbock area, but I think you can find them within 100 miles to the south and southwest. Yeah, well, they're really common in the El Paso area, but the problem is the A and B will sometimes mate And so you get this hybrid strain, and so you still are getting that nasty A-type venom. And they also, Mark's right, they also will mate with diamondbacks. And so if an A strain happens to mate with a diamondback, you got a big A strain. The other thing is we have one of these upstairs. We did not bring it down today. We actually brought a Western Diamondback that you're going to get to see us work with shortly. But the big A strain, I mean, the one that we have upstairs was collected by someone, and he didn't know, we don't know what strain it is. So we consider it to be an A strain. We consider it to be a deadly rattlesnake.
Most of them are A strain.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a snake that is not found here, but was actually taken in Junction. Yeah, this is the Texas coral snake. Remember that statement, red on yellow, kill a fellow, red on black, put him back, friend of Jack, whatever you want to call it. Red on black is typically what we see on the milk snakes, okay? Now, let me tell you something. Everybody that I know in Texas has learned that little rhyme. Once you get south of the border, you forget that you ever heard it. And by the time you get down to Belize or someplace in Central America, you completely put it out of your mind. Because in many of the coral snakes that get really big down there, over 4 feet, the pattern is exactly the opposite of what it is here. The other thing that you want to be excessively careful about is if you look right at that point in that red, you'll notice there are black scales there. Okay, so if you know, or you're with someone that absolutely knows what coral snakes are, and you're not in the Lubbock area, then that's one thing. But don't bet your life or your kid's life on the fact that it might not be a coral snake unless you absolutely are positive. Yeah, and the further south you go into Mexico, there is one that has no black at all. It's just red and yellow. And so, you know, people just don't have any idea what that is, and they think it's a king snake. Well, it's not. So I think that's the last of the slides, and I've kept you in suspense all this time. So what we'll do now is we'll start with the amphibians and work our way up. What should I do with this to cut this off?
Cut the recording off?
No, we can keep the recording on, but just go to the camera.
Oh,
Just do this.
I think you stop sharing your screen. Stop share. Yeah. And then turn on your camera. Our camera is on.
Okay, it's on.
Can you guys see us?
How you have it now is perfect. We
Is
can
that
see
good?
you. Yeah.
Good. All right, let's see if we can even expand this a little bit.
Well, it'll look different on their screen. They can make it as big.
No, I know, but. All right, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna start off with some amphibians and go from there.
Square. They're always so squirmy.
Yep.
This is a barred tiger salamander. This is the type you'll find in Lubbock. Ambystoma tigrinum or Mavordium, depending on how up to date you are on the latest, which, you know, doesn't really mean anything. So this one is after a heavy rain, you'll see these guys come up. So they're a type of salamander. The Ambystoma is the genus, and this is what we call the mole salamanders. And this is the Ambystomatidae, the family of salamanders. And the reason they're called mole salamanders is because they spend most of their time underground. So these guys really thrive here because, you know, Lubbock is pretty dry most of the year. And that's the time where they go and they have a nice little burrow underground. So this guy, you see, he's got some dirt on his head because he's been hiding underground. And then when it rains, that's when they know it's time to come up. And so they'll come up, they'll find a puddle. Usually they'll have like a ephemeral pool where they'll go, and then that's where they'll do all their mating, and they'll lay their eggs. And of course, when they hatch, they don't do tadpoles because they're salamanders. But what they'll have is a kind of a more brown color, and they'll have external gills. And oftentimes they can stay in that larval stage for as long as they need to until the conditions are just right for them to turn into an adult form like this. So they can stay in a larval form for a few years if they need to, or they can only wait a few months. It depends, and they're kind of, they don't have a specific time frame with which to turn into an adult. Now, some populations, not necessarily the ones here, although it might be the ones here, I'm not sure, will have, depending on the population density, they can have up to 2 forms. So this is your typical form. It's small, got a small head. And this is going to be eating, you know, invertebrates, small fish, maybe digging around for stuff, worms, really likes worms, mealworms, crickets, stuff like that. And when it's a larval form, it'll also eat those same types of things, a little more vegetation as well. But in areas where there's a really high population density, then some of them, this is determined genetically, I think.
Yeah,
It's gonna happen.
and it was actually described by Francis
Oh, okay.
out at
At a reef. Oh, okay. So yeah. So then when they have a really high population density, you'll have some of the tadpoles will be born with very large heads, and they'll be born bigger. And their main diet in that case is going to be other tiger salamanders. And so when there's enough
cannibalistic.
Yeah, when there's enough salamanders, some of the salamanders will turn into salamander eaters, specialists. And so they'll have really big heads, and then they will prey almost exclusively on the other salamanders. But it only happens when there's a high enough population. If the population's pretty low, not very dense, and they'll all just be like this guy, this normal guy. So, and I love their derpy look. It's very cute. All right. Now we have a lot of toad diversity. If you also go out during a rain, you'll see a bunch of types of toads hopping around. Texas toads, Great Plains toads, Woodhouse's toads. This one is a Great Plains toad. This is one of the ones you can find here. This one is actually found out in Slayton. So this is a male because it has the cheek or the little throat pouch here. It's not singing now because he's not in a singing mood. But here, so you can see they have this green splotchy pattern. There he goes. Yeah, you hear him? Green splotchy patterns.
The release me call.
I don't know if you guys can hear that. Very cute. So a lot of the times you can identify toads based on these different suite of characteristics. One of the things to look for on the bufos like this is whether they have a dorsolateral line going down. So this one has a very, very faint dorsolateral line. Some of them won't have it at all. Some of them will be very distinct.
Also the ridges behind the eyes.
And then so not all the toads will have this, but most of them will have at least some form. And you can identify the species on a lot of cases based on the type of dermal crest. So this is dermal bone here behind the eyes, the crest. And so that is actual dermal bone formed from the dermis. And so a lot of toads will have different types of those crests. You can also, all the bufo toads will have what's going for that. Yeah, I don't want to poke them, but yeah. So here's the dermal, here's the dermal crest there. You guys see that pretty okay? Another thing you'll see on the bufos is the parotid gland. So that's this bulb here right behind the eye. And you can also tell the difference on different toads based on the shape and size of that parotid gland. It's not very apparent in this guy. Looks like it's been reduced a little bit, but so there's the parotid gland. It's going to be really apparent on some. So toads like the cane toads that you'll see in South Texas and invasive in a lot of places like Australia, they can secrete a very, very foul toxin from those that's enough to, say, kill a dog. So a lot of dogs will eat a cane toad and then they'll get sick and die. All of the toads will produce a toxin, a bufotoxin, from those parotid glands as a defense mechanism. But in the vast majority of the cases that we see in toads in Texas, it's not going to be lethal. It's just going to make you sick. So I've had, my dog has eaten a toad before and they just threw up. There's the Sonoran desert toad in Colorado is another one that could be potentially lethal. This one's not anything to worry about.
And that cane toad that he's talking about, the one that was from originally Central America and then introduced into Australia, it's actually killing crocodiles over there because they're eating them. Mm-hmm. And it's also the one that a few years ago, some of you folks that may be a little more senior like me, remember there were people that were licking toads to get high.
That was the cane toad.
They were licking cane toads, parotid glands, and more than one of them died as a result of that.
Just get ready for his close-up here.
Yeah.
I love the amphibians. They always have that same facial expression.
Yeah.
They could be being chased by a predator or be halfway down a snake's mouth and they'll still have that same face. They're just, they're models of consistency.
Want to get your turtle?
Yeah, let's do the turtles next. Okay, so we have 5 species of turtle in Lubbock County, and then there's a few more in terms of the entire Llano Estacado. One of the ones that you'll probably encounter the easiest, because it's a terrestrial turtle, is the ornate box turtle here. So this is an ornate box turtle, and it got that name because of the shell. It's really ornate. Now you have the eastern box turtle or the 3-toed box turtle. It's going to be just kind of a uniform color, uniform brown. They're not going to have this ornate pattern on here. So that's why this is called the ornate box turtle. And box turtles are terrestrial. So a lot of people think, you know, what's the difference between a turtle and a tortoise? And you say, well, a tortoise is on land and a turtle's in the water, right? Well, tortoises are on land, that's true, and there's not any aquatic tortoises, but a tortoise is specifically a member of the family Testudinidae. It's the tortoise family. It's a type of turtle. And this is a box turtle, not a box tortoise, because it is in the Amididae family, which is the same family that you'll see your river turtles. So this turtle's ancestors were presumably aquatic.
Yep.
And then they came back onto land, and they're now terrestrial turtles. But you'll see some anatomical similarities, a couple of differences. One, they don't have any webbed feet. So those feet are not for swimming. Those feet are for digging. They have those claws that they can use to scrape away. They have a domed shell. The domed shell is not very useful for swimming because it's not very streamlined. It's like a lot like driving a box on the road, right? So it's not air or water will just, you know, hit that front and it won't flow over. So you'll see with aquatic turtles, they'll have a flat pancake-shaped shell. So that's how they can swim faster. This one doesn't have to worry about that. So this has a domed shell. And it's also hinged here. I don't know if you can see. So they can close their shell in the front and the back. And other turtles that are terrestrial can do this as well. In some cases, like I think it's the wood turtle, can seal it completely shut and survives forest fires by doing that. It'll dig a little on the ground, seal itself shut. A fire will rage over it, and then it'll emerge. It'll have a burnt shell, but the turtle itself will be fine on the inside. Now, the shell, it's part of its skeleton. It's not something that it can leave like a hermit crab or anything like that. It's part of its skeleton, so you can't actually leave it. And you can see here, you can see how the legs are going in there. So we have our rib cage, and our spine, and our pelvic and pectoral girdles. our shoulders and our hips, they're going to be outside of our rib cage. In the case of a turtle, this shell is formed from a fusion of the rib cage and spinal cord with dermal bone to form that. And then the girdles, the pelvic and pectoral girdles, are actually shunted inside of the quote unquote rib cage. And so the entire body has moved inside the rib cage, which has been fortified to serve as a protective shell. But it's still part of the skeleton. So you find a dead turtle shell, you can see on the top, they're going to have that ridge spine going down the middle of the inside of this top of the shell, which is called the carapace. Then you have the plastron as the bottom. Now, in a lot of bottom-dwelling aquatic turtles, this carapace or this plastron will be very small. Why? Because you don't really need a lot of protection down there because you're sitting on the bottom, right? You're sitting on the bottom, you don't need to protect down there. And it's heavy, and if you don't need it to be heavy, then you don't really need it. So snapping turtles, musk turtles, mud turtles, they're all bottom-dwelling turtles will have a very reduced plastron. This guy doesn't, because this guy can get flipped over like this, and he's got to protect himself. And they're actually really good at flipping themselves back over.
Yeah, they are.
They can do that. So, and then example of what I'm talking about when I say a river turtle, this is probably the most common river turtle in North America. It's incredibly popular in the pet trade and has actually been introduced in a lot of places. This is the red-eared slider. Now, hopefully she'll cooperate and show us why she's called a red-eared slider. But you see how the shell is flat. It's flat and pancake shaped. This is a lot more streamlined. So this is a river turtle. Now, she also needs a trim for her nails because she got really long nails. Yeah, there you go. You can see a little bit of red popping up there. Hopefully she'll show us her feet. But her feet are a lot more paddle shaped. They're not like clubbed like a box turtle. So this is a turtle that can actually swim around. It spends most of its time in water. It'll come out onto a log to bask. Females will move and go lay their eggs in sand. But for the most part, they're going to spend most of their time near water. Now, box turtles cannot swim. If you throw a box turtle in the water, it's going to sink. And if it's lucky, it will actually be able to walk out of the water. But if it's not, then it'll drown. You throw a red-eared slider in the water, it'll swim away. They're really fast in the water. Nigh uncatchable, really. You can catch them pretty easy on land, but once they're in the water, they're like Michael Phelps. Really fast. So, but this one is, again, it's a eastern species. Now, I am not convinced that they have not always been in Lubbock. They're certainly in Lubbock now, and they're certainly the most common type of turtle that you'll see if you go to the park, and you'll see a bunch of turtles basking. They may very well have been here for a while. It's hard to tell because, again, they're so popular in the pet trade, and they're so common in the eastern United States where they're for sure have been, it's where they evolved, that it's difficult to determine where their historical range ends and where their introduced range begins. Kind of the same thing with the bullfrog. Now, if you find one of these in California, obviously that's way too far west. There's no way this little turtle could cross the Rocky Mountains. So that's an introduction. But here in Lubbock, it's kind of a weird gray area. Now, certainly you'll see a lot of them here, though. So, and you can also get these at your local pet store if you really want a turtle. But they are a lot of work. So. And a lizard.
Here's a lizard.
Ooh, I'm getting a little hissy, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is this is not a lizard you'll find in Lubbock. So this is a painted chuckwalla. Now this is chuckwallas in general. You can find them in the Sonoran Desert, so a bit further west than us. They're a desert iguanian relative. It's a group of lizards. So they're vegetarians mostly. They eat a lot of cactus and succulents, fruits, occasional insect, but yeah, mostly vegetarian lizards. And the painted chuckwalla is a special, it's a different species than the one you'll find on the mainland, in the mainland Sonoran Desert. This is one that is endemic to island. I think it's San Esteban.
East San Esteban, yeah.
Yes.
It's also called the San Esteban chuckwalla.
Yeah,
and
the San
it's
Esteban
endangered
chuckwalla.
and protected.
Mm-hmm. So that's an endemic island species in the
Sea of Cortez.
Sea of Cortez in Baja, California. So not a whole lot of predators, and of course, you know, introduction of predators, of animals that get rid of its habitat, like goats, has caused this animal to become endangered. So this one has actually used to be part of a breeding program at Arizona State, was it?
No, it was a dentist that had the ability to, he had the permits to breed, and we found out about it. Someone knew him, and we asked him if we could have some or one, and he actually said, I'll give you 2 if you promise not to sell them, if you promise not to kill them, and if you use them for educational purposes. And so we actually are fortunate enough to have an endangered species that we legally have, and it's a really interesting animal. Chuckwallas are infamous for getting into areas between rocks, and then they puff up, and you literally almost have to pull their tail off before you can pull one out if they get really into an area between rocks. And this guy's, he's kind of mean. We also got a female, but we keep them separate because he occasionally will beat her up.
Yeah. Reptiles are strange
Yeah.
social animals. So generally it's a good idea if you have a lizard to keep them separate. A lot of people, panic mode. Yeah. So yeah, big, chunky, likes to eat vegetables. Did we name this one? We named one of them Jabba the Hutt. Was it this one?
Yeah, I think
it was Jabba the Hutt, yeah. So painted chuckwalla, endangered species, really cool. If you ever go to San Esteban, you'll see him.
But you better get permission because
Yeah.
the Mexican government doesn't give it to everyone.
All right, snaky time. All right, so we mentioned the glossy snake. If you have snake phobia, this is the time to brace yourself. But this is our Texas glossy snake. So this one's kind of a bit
Remember I said how nervous they were?
yeah, very spazzy.
They are very nervous snakes.
Yeah, so let's see if I can get his face up close. There you go. So he's flicking his tongue, really, and that's, you know, a lot of reptiles and amphibians both have what's called a Jacobson's organ in the roof of their mouth, and snakes in particular, and also a lot of lizards, will use that tongue, and it's forked, and that tongue will pick up particles of different scents and whatnot in the air, and then take it back, and then it'll flutter into 2 grooves on the roofs of the mouth, and then be quote unquote analyzed by the Jacobson's organ, translated by the brain. It's basically a really intense sense of smell. So it's not truly smell because it's not with their nostrils, which are mostly used for breathing in this case, but it's a very good sense of smell. So they can, the reason it's forked is, one, it increases the surface area of that tongue. But the other thing is that it's forked, and so if you have 2 branches of your tongue and you're, you know, tracking a mouse, and one of the forks has more mouse particles on it than the other, then you can tell which way the mouse has gone. And so that's how they can track down food. So it's beneficial for finding food, for finding something to eat. And it's also beneficial for things like rattlesnakes, for example, which bite their food, envenomate it, and then quickly release it. And then the mouse will scurry off into the brush. And so the rattlesnake has to find it. And they have the tongue that can help them. They also have a heat sensing pit. Now this guy doesn't. That's just going to be in the pit vipers, and then the pythons and boas will have heat sensing organs. But that also helps them find warm-blooded food. This guy's got to find it the old-fashioned way. Now these guys, you can find them in Lubbock and around Lubbock, east and west, but they're kind of strange in terms of when they'll show up. So sometimes you'll see a lot of them, and then most of the times you won't see any of them. So they kind of come out at random times in really high numbers. So there was one time we went out looking for snakes, and we found about 7 of these in a single night, and then I haven't seen one since. So that's how that works. But very cool, and glossy because they're very shimmery. So that's their name. And of course, this is a harmless snake. And this is also a harmless snake. This is a Texas long-nosed snake called Pinocchio. And so you can see it's got the red and yellow are touching. So this is obviously a highly venomous coral snake. No, it's not. It's just another reason that rhyme should not be your only line of,
Primary.
you should not be your primary defense, because this is a yellow and red touching. So obviously it would be confused by a coral snake for a lot of folks. And they do occur with coral snakes, especially out in Arizona. You get long-nosed snakes there that co-occur with the Sonoran coral snake.
This is a big one.
And this is a very large one. Now these are nocturnal snakes. They'll spend their days underground, and then at night they'll come out on bright nights. And what they'll do is they're called a long-nosed snake because they have a very long, pointy nose or snout. It's not really, their nose isn't pointy, but their snout is pointy. So it's a long-nosed snake. Long-snouted snake just doesn't sound as cool, I guess. And what these guys will eat is primarily other reptiles. So lizards, snakes, their eggs. And so what they'll do, these guys are nocturnal, and they come out and hunt at night. And lizards are mostly diurnal. Now we have some exceptions, the Mediterranean house geckos, which are introduced. Those are the ones you see on your walls, but they're kind of limited to urban areas. They like to live on house walls and eat your mosquitoes for you. And then night lizards, but those are found further west. But most lizards that we have here are diurnal. So where do they go at night? They go underground. They find a nice place to sleep where there aren't any predators, and that's where this guy comes in. So he uses that tongue to find sleeping lizards and or their eggs and or sleeping snakes, and then we'll use that snout to dig around in the sand and dirt, dig them up and eat them while they're sleeping. This one is not an aggressive species at all, and it's actually its main line of defense if a predator encounters it is one, of course, to run away. That's always step one. If that doesn't work, it will actually expel blood and feces and musk, a very potent combination from its cloaca, its butt, and a lot. And it just kind of like how the horned lizard will shoot blood from its eyes, this snake will shoot blood from its butt as a way to deter predators. And so if you're about to eat something and then it just starts pooping blood, then you're probably going to be like, this snake seems kind of sick, and I don't want to catch whatever it's carrying.
That's an interesting aspect about the hognose too.
Mm-hmm.
When it plays dead, when it acts like it's sick, interestingly enough, predators don't necessarily like to eat prey that looks sick or acts sick.
Because that's how you get sick. So that's the line of defense for this guy. But very interesting snakes. And then this is a Great Plains rat snake. This is our native rat snake in the Llano Estacado. If you find a rat snake on the Llano Estacado, it's going to be this one. So it has that very common pattern. You'll see the same pattern in a lot of snakes. You'll see it in glossies. Other rat snakes in juvenile form will have it. The Massasaugas will have a very similar pattern to this. But yeah, it's just the blotches. So the reason that they're called rat snakes, and this is going to sound, I don't know actually why I brought this up, is they eat a lot of rodents. So this is a rodent specialist. They will eat birds. When they're younger, they'll usually go for insects and lizards. But once they're at adult size, they're going to be mostly eating rodents because that's a plentiful food source. It's high in nutrients. And you might not be able to tell from the camera, but most of the snakes that we have in Lubbock and Texas and the United States that aren't venomous, which most of them aren't venomous, are going to kill their food with constriction. Now, when we think of constriction, we usually go to, the giant Burmese pythons and the anacondas, and those definitely kill by constriction, but so do snakes like this. So this thing will grab a mouse or a small vole or a shrew, and will use its teeth to hold it in place. They have the teeth that point backward, and then it'll wrap its whole body around it and squeeze. And what we used to think that what that would do was it would suffocate them, right, or crush them. What it actually does is it squeezes so hard that the blood will stop flowing in their body and it'll cut off blood flow. And that's how they kill them.
And it also will sometimes burst the heart.
Yes.
They're
They
capable
squeeze.
of crushing so much, putting so much pressure on the rib cage that the heart actually bursts.
Now, this one would not be able to make my heart burst, except with love. My heart bursts with love. But yeah, this is a very nice snake to have around, especially if you have a rodent problem. Get as many of these as you can. They're a lot nicer to have around than the rattlesnakes. Although it depends on who you ask. I would personally love to have a lot of rattlesnakes around, but.
All right.
Oh, he got
Harvey.
huge.
Yes, he has.
He got really big. He was so tiny when we got him. All right, so this is our Mexican milk snake. So red and black, friend of Jack, right? Again, if you have coral snakes in Mexico and Belize that look just like this, and they're highly venomous. So again, take it with a grain of salt. So this is the Mexican milk snake. This is going to be the one you find in the south and southwest Texas into Mexico. Now we have milk snakes up here. They're a different variety, and so they won't look as vibrant. They're called the Great Plains milk snake. They look a little bit different, but no, they're all the milk snakes. Now the reason they're called milk snakes is because these are also rodent predators for the most part, and where there's a lot of rodents in barns. So these guys will spend a lot of time in barns. They're very, very reclusive, especially in comparison to some other rodent eaters like rat snakes. As a matter of fact, they'll spend most of their time, especially the milk snakes up here, they'll spend most of their time under rocks, underground, and they'll very rarely come to the surface at all. And they actually do this really cool trick, because you think a snake needs to bask in the sunlight to warm up, right? Needs to come outside to warm up. They can sit underneath a rock and turn their body flat, like kind of like this, or sideways against the rock, and they can absorb the heat they need. And the sunlight that hits the rock goes through the rock, and they can absorb it from the bottom of the rock. And they also really like tin, little tin sheets for that reason. So if you have a lot of tin sheets on your friend's property and you go flip them, you might find a milk snake under there. But anyway, sorry, the reason that they are called milk snakes is because they found a lot in barns. And so there's an old wives' tale that they would that they were there to suck the milk out of the cows. So they would steal the milk from the cows, which is not true. They don't drink milk. They eat the rodents that are in the barn. But that's why they're called milk snakes. And it kind of stuck. So very pretty, very interesting snakes. Here's the next. We got the whole crew, don't we?
We got the whole.
Ragnar's in the corner there and tied
Yeah,
out.
I know he is.
Well, see, I don't know which one's in which, so this is as big of a surprise for me as it is for you. Lou, you gave me this one already. This is the Great Plains rat.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I could show him again.
That's going to be the Transpaco.
Okay. Oh, excellent. So rat snakes are one of that type of what we call colubrids. And this is another rat snake. Now, this is not one you'll find in Lubbock. This is the Trans-Pecos rat snake. So this is a desert specialist. So obviously nocturnal. And you notice the eyes on this thing are very large in comparison to the other rat snakes we were looking at. It's better for seeing at night. This thing, it's got a very intricate pattern. But this is a rat snake that lives in the desert. So it can climb sheer cliffs. You'll find it a lot on cliffs and under rocks. It'll come out at night. Almost exclusively nocturnal. Won't really ever come out during the day. For the most part, they're very gentle snakes. I've run into a few that were not so gentle, but again, it's a non-venomous snake. And it also kills by constriction, so it's a lot of muscles there. Now, the interesting thing about snakes that kill with constriction is that that's the primary way in which they kill their food. So they don't need a strong bite to kill their food with. So they actually have a very, very weak bite. And so if this snake was for some reason angry with you and it bit you, it really honestly would not even hurt that much. Like it would be more startling than anything.
However, a lizard with a head this big,
Well, yeah.
lizards kill with their bite.
So the lizard with a head this big will hurt a lot. A snake with a head this big will not hurt that much. Now, there are some exceptions. So a lot of snakes that don't kill with their bite, And the coach whips, they don't kill with their bite. They just kill with, they don't kill with constriction. They kill with their bite. So coach whips will bite harder than usual. Again, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt you. It's just going to hurt. But it's not going to do any damage. Same with Eastern racers. And of course, the largest snake that we have in Texas is the Texas indigo down South Texas. They get about 10 feet long, and they do not kill with constriction either. They kill with their bite. So that one's actually likened to being bit by a very, very large lizard, which if you've ever been bit by a very, very large lizard, is very painful. But again, it's a non-venomous one. So.
And we got a friend that's making noise here. Remember what we said about the bull snake?
Hold the head over that. There you go. Hold up. He's hissing. So a lot of folks confuse these bull snakes for rattlesnakes because of that sound he's making. There's actually a little piece of cartilage in the back of his throat that he releases air out of his one lung. Because most snakes only have one lung. It's the left lung. The right one's gone. And he breathes in and then he breathes out, and it rattles that piece of cartilage and makes that loud hissing sound. So it's not a vocal cord that's making that. This is also a constrictor, and these can get rather large. This is probably one of the largest snakes that we have in the Lubbock area. This one's pretty decent size, but they can get up to about 7 feet.
I've actually seen one down in the Junction area that was 7 feet 8 inches.
Yeah.
It's just a huge, huge animal.
You gotta move it so they can see.
Yeah.
He's all black.
I've only been bitten by about 3 out of probably 300. And what they'll do, if you put your palm flat, they will hit your palm.
A lot of times they'll bluff because they know that they're not going to be able to do damage to something that's as big as we are. So they'll bluff, but they don't want to hurt their teeth. So they'll actually just headbutt you
Yep.
for the first few times before they even open their mouth. It's all a show to tell you to back off. That's what he's doing. I don't know why he does this though.
We've had him for a long time, and he still does it. Most of them calm down.
It's like 50% of the time he does it, and
Yeah.
sometimes he calms down. He's a strange one.
But this one was caught in this area. This is the color pattern. You'll see this sort of orangish. Let me see. Look at that little. I don't know how clear it comes. It's an orange red.
Yeah.
Real light color, and that's the one that we see in this area pretty commonly.
And these snakes will really go, you'll see them a lot in prairie dog towns, your gopher areas. They love gophers. They love prairie dogs.
Why don't you get, what's her name in, so we can show her the,
So the rattlesnake,
no, the
copperhead,
yeah,
jasmine. Okay, so this is a snake that you're not going to see in Lubbock.
But one of the things you want to know about snakes is that they evolved from a group of lizards. Okay, and that group of lizards includes things like the Komodo dragon and some other things that are certainly not found around here. But the most primitive of all the snake families are the boids, and those include the pythons, boa constrictors, anaconda.
Now, we do have some of the boids in North America. We have
Yep.
the rosy boa and the rubber boa, but they're going to be found further west, so we're not going to have any native boas here in Texas. But this is one you'll probably see. It's one of the most popular pet snakes. If you have a friend who has a pet snake, this is probably the snake that they have, either that or a corn snake, which is, again, a type of rat snake. This is Jasmine. She's a ball python. They're so named because they tend to roll themselves in a nice little knot, in a little ball.
Protecting the head.
Yeah, and they're also called the royal python. Places like Britain, you'll hear them called the royal python. And the reason they call them that is because there's a dubious historical records, which may or may not be true, but they're certainly well known, of Cleopatra in her court. They would use these ball pythons as living jewelry. So they would wear them as status symbols around their neck. Whether that's true or not, I mean, no one knows. Cleopatra is not around to tell us. But that's another reason they call them royal pythons. These are found in the savannas or scrublands of Africa.
Yep.
They spend most of their time underground at night or during the day, and then they come out at night. You'll find them in termite mounds, mammal burrows, under trees, and then they'll come around and then they'll look for things to eat. Again, a lot of rodents that they'll eat.
Remember the point we made about them evolving from lizards?
Yeah, so
You
can see-
actually, this is the only group of snakes that has even a relictual girdle. And this is the relictual pelvic girdle.
You have the pin. You can point it out.
Yeah, there's that.
It's a little bright.
If you look right here,
That's a hind limb.
that is, yeah, it's called a spur, and it's a relictual hind limb. The males have it much more than the females.
Yeah, this is a female. so
And this is
hers
a
kinda
female,
small.
but yeah, there I get it a little bit.
Very tiny.
Yeah, they're just tiny, but it's a little bone, and you can actually, they've gone in and actually looked at the construct of that bone, and there are homologs in the bones of our legs.
Now, these are one of the earlier branches of snake evolution. So the earliest snakes that we find in the fossil record actually had fully developed back limbs.
Yep.
But they had lost their front limbs. So the front limbs were what slots first. And then you have this early branch here that has these spurs. And then all the other snake branches, for the most part, have lost those hind limbs. And also you'll see in these snakes, you'll have a reduced right lung as opposed to just one lung. So, but they have a very large left lung and a vestigial right lung. And then in other more advanced snakes, that lung is gone. And you can also see here, these are one of the groups that has their heat sensing organs. So you can
Yep.
see right here above the upper lip, you see those holes, those pink holes. So those are actually heat sensing organs so that they can detect heat. And what they do, the brain will actually layer that over their visual input. So they can see it, but it's a different organ. But basically it's a membrane that will measure changes in heat signature in the air. And we'll send that to the brain so it can be translated. And that's how they can use to find food. And so you'll see that that's evolved independently from the other other group of snakes that has that heat sensing organ. So it's a case of convergent evolution, where two unrelated groups of snakes have evolved a similar structure. And you'll see it because it's in a different place than these other ones. So
All right, so I think what we do, we're getting close on time, but I think we can pull Nancy out.
you want to do the copperhead too, or just Nancy?
Well, let's,
Nancy's the one they'll see.
yep, whoa,
Did she give
she
him?
was right there.
Here you go. You want a tube or you want me to tube? So these are our snake tubes. Now we want to mess with the snake, but we don't want to mess with the pointy end. So what we'll do, we'll use these tubes, and I'll try to show you
And I'm trying to get her so I don't hurt her.
what's going on. Can you see that? Yeah. There's the snake coming out. All right. All right, this is big enough.
Yeah.
So that's a typical pattern of western diamondback that you'll see. So you want a tuber on the air or on the well, probably a little tuber on the air. I'm going to try and
How about tubing her on this table?
do we have so they can see.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the tubing process. So while we have one person, you always want to do
what she's about to get loose.
one more than one person.
All right, there we go.
You got it?
I got it now. Ooh. I need to get a closer look. Come on, Nancy. Boy, there's venom everywhere.
Drop it on there. So she gets venomated. And this can take anywhere from a few seconds to an hour, depending on the thing. Probably just everything. longer than they are. Usually they kind of get worn down a bit. You get loose. Grab her a little further back. Just a water bottle. Sometimes they'll go right in.
Want to try her on the ground?
Yeah, I'm gonna turn her on the ground. Better angle. I'm gonna grab it further back.
Yeah.
Okay, they can see. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I don't have a good.
And it's hard to do it on the floor. Well, good thing she'll probably be dry by the time we're done with this.
Yeah.
God, it's not a good angle.
No. I'm gonna have to re-get her.
All right. This one.
Now. Don't bite yourself. Take it.
A lot of mud. Maybe. No, no, no. Usually she's really good about this.
Of course, anytime you're trying to show something with a live animal,
Yeah, when it's just us, she goes in. A little further. A little further. For the heavy part. There, that's.
if she'll let us, that'll work. Would you push her body on a little bit more to the?
Into the air. This would be good. Oh my God. That's too much going in. That might be too long. Yeah, now even that's too far. Okay.
How about right there?
Yeah, I think that should work.
We almost had her one time.
Yeah. You get tired. Oh. Come on. We should just go in there.
I thought you was going to though.
Yeah. And then just take out the pressure and get loose.
Hey, you guys, you don't have to harass the snake for us. We get it.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this goes on back and forth. We've done this hundreds of times. A lot of times it goes really easy.
Yeah. Well, you'll see with we were trying to show with the Western Diamondback, we wanted to show you the pits that they had on their face between their nose and their eyes.
That was the reason we were doing it like that. And we don't like to grab them.
We can try the copperhead.
Yeah, we can try a copperhead. I know that's basically about time, but
Well, yeah, we can call it too if they're okay.
do you mind staying a couple more minutes?
No, that's fine. You
All right.
worked hard for us and we appreciate it.
Well, the thing you might have noticed with the Western Diamondback, it has that white and black tail, and that's a diagnostic for those guys. So you see around me.
on my,
That was actually easy.
oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, that was
That
a lot
one went
easier.
very straightforward.
All right, so this is a broad-banded copperhead. So you can see on the, well, now it's looking, there we go. Right, it might be a little foggy, but you can see in between the nose and the eye, there's a pit right underneath the eye. Right about there. That's their heat sensing organ. Now you won't get these in Lubbock. You'll get these, closest you'll get them is Abilene, but they're also really interesting. So you see they have this bright green tail. Now it's a lot brighter when they're young, but they'll use that as a sort of lure that they'll use to kind of attract prey. And so they're all the pit vipers are pretty much ambush predators. So they'll sit and wait in place sometimes for days, and then they'll wait for someone to show up, and then they'll strike. And if they don't find anything for a few days, then they'll move to our next favorite spot. So they live on a very different time scale than we do. But that's it.
The other pit vipers that we find in the U.S. is the cottonmouth. And of course, that's found in South Texas. And actually in the Junction area, that's just close to about the western extent of, there's one more county to the west where we do find them. But I really appreciate the chance for us to get to talk to you today. I'm sorry that Nancy did not play well with us, but that's just the way when you're working with live animals, you never know. And
Oh, we appreciate it so much, Dr. Densmore and Mark. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
and all right.
Thank you
And
very much.
what I will do is I will do what I can to send this recording.
Okay.
If you have questions, you know, I know that we're pressing on time, but
Give me your email.
lou.densmore@ttu.edu. Kipra has that. She also has Mark's email.
Yep.
And so feel free to send a question or
I love answering questions.
whatever. Yeah, you can tell neither one of us has a problem in liking to talk.
You're great. You've been great. Really, we appreciate it so much, and we needed a lot of training hours. So thank you so much for all your work and time.
Okay.
We appreciate
All right.
it.
Well, we appreciate it, and you guys have a great rest of the day.
You too.
And we'll see what we can do about getting this recording to you, okay?
Okay, but Dr. Densmore, I was able to record it. So if you don't want to mess with that, that's fine.
Oh, okay. Good, good. That's good. That's good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Densmore. Thank you, Mark.
Have a good one.
All right.
I think that went well. Sucks that Nancy wasn't going on the tube.